You are now listening to Talk Your Jits podcast.
Welcome back to the Talk Your Jits podcast. This podcast is, as the name implies, all about jiu-jitsu. I'm your host, Lamar Smith, and today's guest is a black belt who trains at RGA located in the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, Raf Z.
Thank you very much for having me on, Lamar, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me about jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu is one of those things that well, quite frankly, I've been doing for so long that it's a huge part of my life.
Oh yeah, most definitely, man. Like I said, the pleasure is all mine, man. I do appreciate you taking the time out, especially with this different time zones we got to deal with. But
Oh, no worries, no worries. I mean, it's a pleasure to share, all the things I've done in jiu-jitsu. I started jiu-jitsu in 2005 in a little gym and actually not far from Toronto. Um, that's kind of how things started out. I was in a really small gym and it kind of wasn't going anywhere. So I then switched to a bigger gym. And from there, I joined a gym run by a guy called Scott Schilling, and he was under Silvio Bering. And Silvio Bering is I believe, a seventh degree black belt now, coral belt.
Mm.
And so that's who I started my really hardcore training with. I mean, that was January of '06 when I switched gyms. Um, I had a bit of wrestling background, a bit of karate background, but it was all really just it all kind of kicked off in 2005. Then I sort of realized this gym was, I wasn't going to grow there, so that's why I
Mm-hmm.
switched. And it was run by this really nice guy, but he completely understood where I was coming from, and I joined this new gym where I still chat to a lot of the guys whenever I go back to Canada. I visit those guys who I started jiu-jitsu with in '05 and '06. So it's a great community in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's been a good old journey. But I've hopped around, moving countries, clubs. So I'm happy to share that experience, because I know in old school jiu-jitsu it's a bit frowned upon moving gyms and all of that. So you know, but it is what it is. Life gets in the way. Um,
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true.
so in in a sense, it kind of sparked with Silvio and Scott, and that's where I met some really good friends, like my friend Dave, my friend Toma, who now runs a jiu-jitsu school in Canada. And it really just, the whole aspect of jiu-jitsu, about the idea of it being like human chess, thinking 3, 4 moves ahead of time, muscle
Mm-hmm.
memory, all of that is always been something I was fascinated by. Um, but I started out real old school. There was, I think the fanciest thing we did was like X guard when I started jiu-jitsu. You know, there was no barambolos, there was no you know inverted guard, there was no single leg X, there was no, there was De La Hiva was around, but that was a bit more advanced. Um, but yeah, that's about it. I mean, I think the I remember we all came back from a competition. I was a blue belt, and one of the guys got swept with a deep half sweep, and we were all like, "What was that? It was magic." So we then all started, going online trying to find DVDs and looking at. There was no instructionals back then. It was
Nah.
just there was, I had a Sala Ribeiro DVD, and I think I had like 3 volumes of it, and that was it. And then Sylvia would come down from Brazil, or well, come up from Brazil to Canada, and show us stuff that they were doing down there. But it was all very fundamental, and I mean, to this day, majority of the things I catch people with are cross chokes, kimuras, arm bars, and that's about it, really.
Isn't it? That's a story that my instructor always tells me. Like when you get to the point where you're like black belt, you're upper rank, and the majority of stuff people get caught in is the basics. It's
Well, it's the
nothing
basics,
crazy,
yeah.
just the basics, just the basics.
It is. It's mad because I've rolled with Roger before, and
Hmm.
Roger Grace. I mean, I was a brown belt when I rolled with him, and it was really he's such a nice guy. First and foremost, he's really lovely, and so I went in for a knee cut pass, and I remember this knee cut pass, and I was like, I really like a knee cut pass, so I went in. I had his collar, I had his sleeve grip, and I went for the sneak up pass, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm getting by." I'm like, "Hold on, how did I end up in Mount Bottom?" And he just armbarred me without even like moving his legs. Um, and I remember the next time he came down to the gym, he was showing his cross choke, and I love a cross choke from Mount. It's
Hmm.
definitely I definitely am of the game that the simpler things are in jiu-jitsu, the more effective they are. And
Hmm.
like you said, you will catch as you get to purple belt, brown belt, black belt, you start catching people with more fundamental techniques that you have made, in a sense, more advanced. When Roger talks about fundamentals, he talks about them in a way where you're like, it's a simple technique, but there's so many details to it. Like
Hmm.
when he showed the cross choke, and I remember my instructor at the time, I was a brown belt when he came down and did a second seminar, and his ribs were hurt. And he was like, "Raf, you're in. You're going to be Roger's, guy who's going to show techniques on." And I just remember the pressure. The pressure. I mean, when I rolled with him, I felt that pressure. But when he was just demonstrating the pressure
Yeah.
that he has, and the little details of like where to put your elbow, where to put your hand, how to move your arm so that it hugs the neck more,
Hmm.
and that's all just for a simple cross choke.
Hmm.
There's nothing fancy about it. A cross choke. It's a cross choke, but it was definitely very mind blowing. But that all stems back to when I started jujitsu, because all we were taught was fundamentals.
Hmm.
I remember. I mean, to be very fair with you, I don't even do triangles because I've got short, stubby wrestling legs. So I think I've hit maybe in full sparring, over the time I've been doing jiu-jitsu, almost, it'll be 19 years. Um,
Wow.
I think I've hit about maybe 5 triangles in full sparring. I mean, I don't know how many arm bars, cross chokes, kimuras, or omoplatas or whatever, but triangles I could definitely count on one hand. It's just everybody has a preference, and I think
Hmm.
when you build your game, and that again goes back to training under Silvio, training in all the other gyms I've trained at. So I was with Scott and with under the Silvio Bearing Fish affiliate until I was a purple belt, and that's in 2010 when I moved to the UK. Um, but again, we just did basics, and I remember going in the UK. I came to study art, to do a master's degree here, and when I looked for flats to live in, it was like, okay, where's the nearest jiu-jitsu gym to the school, and where am I gonna find my flat halfway between the two?
Yeah.
And then sort of I finished my I joined a gym. I joined quite a renowned gym, which was it was run by this brown belt, an RGA, Roger Gracie brown belt, but it was in the Ray Stevens Academy in Wimbledon. And Ray Stevens is a silver medalist in judo, really super nice guy, super tough. Showed me some really cool judo. There was a couple of guys that I trained with in Canada who I believe were, I think, alternates for judo on the Canadian team, and they showed me some things. And it's again, it's like my jiu-jitsu journey, my judo. You know, I only know about 3 or 4 really good throws,
Mm-hmm.
but that's all you need.
Right.
And combining that with jiu-jitsu, you know, I've always been a top player. I've always liked to impose pressure, be on top, sort of a very sort of Chris Houter sort of mindset, if you like.
Yeah.
Basically, my judo is, I've got about 4 throws.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, my mentality in jiu-jitsu has always been be the top guy, be imposing the pressure, imposing, that shoulder pressure, that, the chest pressure and that mentality. I remember seeing Chris Houter seminar, and he was like, you know, you want to be good at jiu-jitsu, you got to, be on top, stay on top, and win on top. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you get taken to the bottom or you get swept, your guard's got to be good enough to be able to get back to the top. And I've always utilized my judo, my wrestling, um, to be on top and really just enjoy that knowledge. I think, when it comes to jiu-jitsu, when you're in in a position of, say, side control or mount, you know that you can do certain things that will not allow your opponent to get out of a situation, or almost like Roger said to me once. He's like, you're leading them down a rabbit hole, and the only
Mm-hmm.
thing at the end of that rabbit hole is a cross choke or an armbar or a submission of some sort. um,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so when I joined Ray's gym, um, I was able to learn some really cool judo. um, Sparred with some really cool people there. Stayed there for a bit. I then finished off my master's degree at Wimbledon School of Art. So then from there, I moved. I met a really nice girl. So jiu-jitsu took a little bit of a step back because I was
Uh-oh.
I was in the middle of moving house and moving within London. It wasn't long. It was a couple months, and then I got back into jiu-jitsu, fairly quickly, and then ended up joining the Carlson Gracie gym in London. And I was there
Mm-hmm.
for about a good 3 years, I think. Um, it was a really nice gym. It was led by a guy called Wilson Jr., and Wilson was again really old school. Um, and Carlson Gracie would come down, and but these guys were like, I used to attend the 7 a.m. class with Wilson, and he showed me some things that were just like, tying people up in ways with the gi that you're like, you just can't even defend a submission. uh,
Right.
and it was just like, wow. And I mean, they have a very big mentality of being on top. Carlson
Mm-hmm.
Gracie is always top game heavy. um, so I felt really at home there. But then I was sort of like, well, I don't know. And then I ended up going to Rogers for a bit, and then I ended up moving out of London. Um, so when I moved out of London, I joined a gym in a little town called Marlow, and it was run by this guy who was, nice enough, but him and I just, we didn't gel on a sort of person to person basis, I guess you can say. He showed
Mm-hmm.
some good techniques. There's some really nice people there. That's the one thing I've always enjoyed about jiu-jitsu is the community, that the idea that everyone is always lovely to one another for the most part. Unless
I would say for the most part, yeah.
they're crushing your face in side control. But the community aspect of jiu-jitsu is really lovely, and I really enjoy that. But just the teaching style, the instructor and I just didn't get on very well. So then I moved to another gym, which was run by a guy called Kev Capel. Kev is, I think, a third-degree black belt under Roger. Really nice guy. Showed me some really cool pressure things, like side control pressure and cross face pressure. And this guy is what, maybe soaking wet 65 kilos, which is about maybe 145 pounds or something like that.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he can keep me down like nothing, and I'm about 90 kilos, so that's about 190, 200 pounds, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling with my maths here, but yeah, he's like he keeps me down, no problem. And that's through him I met my really good friend Paxton, who runs the current gym that I'm at. Um, and so from there, when I moved to where I am now, which is just outside of London in a little town called Henley,
Mm-hmm.
just by the river, really nice. And my friend opened up a gym, and I literally bought a house about a month before he opened up his gym, and the gym was 5 minutes walk down from my house. So it was
Nice.
like it was like the gods smiled. Um, so yeah, that's when I sort of joined my friend Paxton, and from there, I was a brown. At this point, I was a one stripe brown belt when I joined with him, or a two stripe brown belt. I can't remember exactly. And then I ended up getting my black belt through. Well, basically, Roger and Maurizio Gomez, Roger's dad, um, said, "Yeah, you're ready for your black belt," and then that's how it all happened. It all happened sort of like literally between COVIDs. Um, so it happened in this year is my third year as a black belt, and
Nice.
um, and it's just the target just goes bigger and bigger on your back, but it's I'm 42 years old now, and I've got a few minor injuries, no major injuries, but the young guys, we've got a couple of really young sort of athletic blue belts who
Mm-hmm.
I've got to tie up and sort of keep still. But for me, jiu-jitsu has always been one of those constants that I've never gone to the gym. I wasn't really the most exercise I do outside of jiu-jitsu is cycling to jiu-jitsu. And that's about it. I mean, I think for me, it's a good release in terms of mental well-being. You know,
Yes.
get to
Yes.
you get to really, um, get smashed sometimes, get humbled, smash some people up, humble some people. And I could go on. I mean, I've rolled with some, interesting people. I've rolled with Carlson Gracie. I've rolled with Roger. Um, just trying to think who else I've rolled with. There's, you know, Kiwan Gracie. Um, we used to have at my first gym in Canada for a while. Mark Bocek, the former UFC guy, was there. Um, I've one of my the first gym I was at. The guy who ran that gym was good friends with a Russian guy who ran a wrestling gym just outside of Toronto, and Carlos Newton used to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a great journey, but again, for me, it's really, I competed up until purple belt, and then I sort of was like, life gets in the way, jobs. I really don't want to be going into work with black eyes and busted up limbs. So now I just
Right.
teach and sort of, you know, for me, I just honestly teach fundamentals most of the time whenever I'm teaching, whether it's an advanced class or a beginner's class or nogi, it's always fundamentals. Um,
Yeah.
because for me, fundamentals are the things that you get those right. And I've had guys try and berimbolo me and do an inverted guard. And, I'm always like, well, just grab a collar and crush their face. You can't berimbolo me if your face is getting crushed in the mat.
Yeah.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you. I'll tell you a really funny story. I think I was a purple belt still. I was going with this really athletic blue belt, and he was a lovely guy. And this was probably the first time I've ever seen inverted guard. This was probably 2014, so about 10 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. And this guy starts sort of sticking his butt up in the air and putting his feet up and rotating underneath me. I'm like, what's he doing? So I'm just like, I'll just grab this collar and see what happens. So I grab sort of, so as he was starting to rotate, I just grabbed the near side collar of my left hand side, and as he rotated, I just sort of tucked the collar in underneath his chin. And as he rotated even more to try and hit a pneumoplata, he just choked himself.
Uh,
But and it's one of those things that it's as you get to a higher level, as you progress through jiu-jitsu, you see things. And I think that's what teaching has really brought in for me, is that I'm able to notice details even
Mm-hmm.
more now. When I'll be, say, doing an armbar for a class, I'll be like, okay, this is what you're doing. Oh, I'll sort of feel something like, oh yeah, that's a nice crucial little detail. And you sort of learn these little nuances. It's what Hickson talks about, and then Henry Akins talk about the whole idea of invisible jiu-jitsu. Those little things that you don't see happening.
Tiny details.
Yeah, and I mean, being under Maurizio Gomez's Neon Belly, for example, when Roger's dad did a Neon Belly on me in a seminar, and I could feel like where he put his shin bone just on the edge of my rib cage, and I knew if I moved, there was two things that were going to happen. A, I wouldn't be able to breathe very well.
Mm-hmm.
Two, if I really shifted a lot, I'd pop my own rib. So I had to
Right.
stand still. I couldn't do anything.
Just had to accept
Um,
it.
just accept it and just wait for the inevitable. I mean, I think that's the big difference I see with this, this fancy jujitsu and this new age stuff, which is really, some of it is pretty cool. The leg lock stuff is interesting. Um, but if you don't have good fundamentals, you're never really going to be able to control someone or be able to adapt really effectively and quickly in a bad position.
Mm-hmm.
We have this one purple belt who comes to our gym every now and again. She's really lovely, but she's coming to us because she's like, I want to learn more fundamentals. I mean, she's got a great berimbolo and she's got, all this really cool new age jiu-jitsu. But I'm like, you know, show me your cross choke. And she's like, oh yeah, it's not too bad. Um, so it's one of those things that, I'm again a big believer in the fundamentals of things. And if you can get that down, with pressure, all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, I can stand up in anyone's guard and I really don't mind what they do because there is an answer for everything. It's really just about how much pressure you put on to make sure that they don't take that position further so that you are in danger of a submission or a sweep or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's anyway. Do you have any questions for me? I mean, I feel like I've sort of been sort of talking at you for a long
Oh
time.
no, man! I'm enjoying the story, man. makes my job so much easier.
Yeah, no, man, I've got stories for hours. I mean, we had this one guy at the gym once, and he was a lovely guy, and he was really, you know, the one thing I've always found about jujitsu is egos often
Mm-hmm.
are either lost when you enter the gym or they are severely squashed out of you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
um, so we had this one guy who came into the gym, and he was a nice enough guy, quite strong. He worked in construction, I think, and he
Oh.
pretty strong arms. Fairly, I think he was a bricklayer or something like that. But I mean, this guy, he'd grab onto you, and you're like, I'm not breaking that grip.
Right.
Um, but he was like one of those guys that he rolled as intensely with everybody, whether you were first day white belt, a girl, or me, or any of the other instructors, or purple belts, blue belts, whatever. And he was a white belt, and he was just like a monster. And I remember we were doing King of the Hill once, and we are just doing
Uh-huh.
we are doing passing the guard, positional sparring, and so I go in with him, and I was like, yeah, whatever. And I'm so, taking, I go at old man speed always. I don't really turn up the volume too much because, quite frankly, I can't be bothered. And also, I like to save my stamina. So
Mm-hmm.
I go at old man speed. I will turn it up every now and again. I'll tell you about a story about that in a minute. But yeah, so I went in with this guy and I was in his guard. And so I started to stand up. And, I grabbed the lapel, grabbed the sleeve, and I started to stand up and I broke his guard. He literally jumped to his feet and tried to do a flying armbar on me.
Oh
And,
God.
and literally, as his legs came up, I just sort of swiped across his leg and he just fell to the ground. And then I went on to mount. He was the kind of guy that didn't like losing. And so he was
Mm.
just thrashing about. So he then turned around. I took his back and I literally fully dug my arms in under his armpits, took both his hands like at the just under the wrist, between the elbow and the wrist, and just tucked his arms in and fully flattened him out. And he still was like thrashing about and jerking,
Oh yeah.
trying to get out. And I was like, dude, you've lost. Just accept it.
Just accept it.
Yeah. But you get that in jiu-jitsu, and he sort of lasted for a month and then never came back. But then you get people who are really just nice and humble, and they come in and they're like, oh, I'm just trying to get fit and healthy, and all of a sudden they're monsters on the mat, and they're only like 130 pounds soaking wet, and you're like, wow, what have we done here?
So we have created a monster.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of those things that in jiu-jitsu you just it's like the guys always laugh at me because when I come into the gym I'm just in like jogging bottoms and like a hoodie, and I'm kind of just like, yeah, whatever, I'm here to train and just break some arms and choke some people.
Right.
But then like every now and again, if I have a late, like, because I teach as well, so I'm like at a school. So if I come in, I have a late evening or something, and I come into the gym, um, you know, dressed for work, where I'm in like nice shirt, chino trousers, dress shoes, and a suit jacket. And then
Mm.
these guys are like, "Wow, man, you look so completely different." But it's like, it's one of those things that you don't know. My
Right.
luckily my ears are still pretty good for 20 years of jiu-jitsu almost.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy with that. My wife's always telling me, like, you can't get cauliflower ear. I'm like, don't worry, as long as you do a technique effectively, you should be all right.
I know, right? I
Um,
think I think I remember one time I was rolling with someone and they tried to like grind their arm and they kind of like went against my ear and my ear felt like it was on fire for like 2 days. I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh please, I do not want cauliflower
Oh, I know,
ears.
I know. It's funny because, like, when you get people who get frustrated, like, for example, when I'm injured, like, I'll be going to probably training tomorrow, and what I'm going to do is because I've got a shoulder injury at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll one-handed. I'm going to just tie my belt up so that it doesn't come undone. I'll tuck my left hand into my belt and just roll one-handed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that develops you in several different ways. It teaches you different things. Um, but essentially, what it means is I can still train.
Mm-hmm.
But so to the point, what I'm trying to make here is that, injuries happen and you just have to kind of work around them. But
Oh yeah.
what always makes me laugh is when I am injured, and what I like to do is then I work my defense. So I
Mm-hmm.
frustrate. I like frustrating people,
Frustrating and annoying, I sure do.
especially some of our purple belts and our brown belts that train with us. When you're like, I'm just gonna be one step ahead of you every time, and every time you do something, I'm just gonna go nope, 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 nope. And so often when I'm in that mood, or if I'm injured and I'm doing that, um, speaking of elbows, I always get that whole grinding the elbow into the leg. I think my legs become so desensitized nowadays that I don't even feel that.
You lucky.
And people will do it. I just kind of look at them. I'm like, So you're digging your elbow in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open my leg up a little bit in my guard. All of a sudden, I'm going to trap your elbow and sweep you.
Right.
But I just find it. What I find interesting about jiu-jitsu is, there is ways to roll intelligently, and there's like the sort of go out full on and just be super, not aggressive, but like trying to be dominant.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember we're talking with I was talking with one of our purple belts, and he was like, "Oh, Raf, have you like seriously, like how much like on a 100% scale do you actually roll at?" I'm like, probably about maybe 40, 50 if I'm really like, depends on who I'm going up against. He's like, "When's the
Mm-hmm.
last time you went 100%?" I was like, I don't know, but let's give it a go. And so we had this 5-minute roll, and he was like, I literally just went 100% from the very beginning to the very end. Um, he was like, he's like, at the end of that roll, he's like, oh my God, it was like a different scenario, basically. It was like such a
Mm-hmm.
different roll to, because usually whenever I roll, I'm like, I'll try something new out or I'll try a new detail. But he was like, man, you just were non-stop. It was like a freight train running through. The pressure was constant. Your guard passing was like 5 times what it normally is. I'm like, yeah, but it's
Mm.
because you asked me to go 100%.
You're
So
right.
I just, I turned into competition mode in a sense, and I was like, I'm gonna just, because for me, competing has always been one of those things that when I did do it, I didn't really care about points, and I never understood the rule system anyway. For me,
Right.
it was about take down, get the dominant position, get on top, and submit. And realistically, if you actually do that, you probably score whatever amount of points it's worth now in IBJJF and whatever the amount of points is for a guard pass to mount a side control neon belly, whatever. But for me, it was really not just. It was really just about take down, get on top, and win.
Yeah.
And that's
Like
that.
you, like you said, get on top, stay on top.
Exactly. I think it's one of those things that in jiu-jitsu, it's, people forget that the guard, and I mean, Chris Houter makes a really good point of reference on that. It's one of those positions that it makes you comfortable, but also slightly lazy.
Mm.
In that sense, what I mean is that, you can easily pull guard, and don't get me wrong, I like pulling guard, and whenever I roll with anybody, I'm not afraid to say that my first roll is, say we have a 5-minute roll. Um, my first thing is going to be take down, get on top. If I submit you, I'm going to be pulling guard after that because, in a sense, I don't want to disregard my guard, but
Mm-hmm.
then also it's good to put yourself in bad positions. But I feel like the guard can make people lazy, and
Oh, excuse me.
oh, no worries. The guard is one of those positions that you can hang out in and throw up some submissions, and if it fails, you can come back to the safety of guard. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
if I am going for, any submission in, say, a cross choke from mount, if I don't hit that correctly, I'm going to get swept and be in guard.
Mm-hmm.
And I might still have the grips, I might not, but it's one of those things that I was always taught position before submission, and then from there you can start to impose your will. But in that sense, I've always found that guard can be one of those places that you can just kind of be in, and you might get a sweep, you might get you know a submission, but you're not really winning. It's sort of like a 50-50 in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because I can either sweep or submit you. You can pass my guard, maybe leg lock me or whatever. Um, Whereas, if you're on top, and actually from a visual standpoint alone, not basing it on points or basing it on anything, if you look at someone in guard who's on their back, it
Mm-hmm.
looks like the person on top, even though they're in a probably worse position, is winning.
Yeah.
If you look at UFC scoring, the guy who's ground and pounding the guy on the bottom, but he's in his guard, he's winning.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been of the mentality that get on top, and whether you're in half guard, whether you're in side control, whether you're in mount, it's one of those things that you just put some pressure in, and eventually you'll get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
But
It's all how you apply that pressure. Like our school is built like that too. Our master Joe Moera, he's an old school
yeah,
guy, old school Brazilian guy. Just smash, no speed,
yeah,
just
no,
smash, just smash.
and
Don't need nothing else, just smash.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's one of those things. Roger always jokes around. He's like, "Oh no, you don't tap to pressure." Um, but if it's applied really badly,
If it's yeah,
I've tapped some people with pressure. I remember going
mm-hmm.
to a gym not too far from me with my friend, and I was showing them something, and we did a drill, and I was like, we're gonna do a no hand side control drill that that Wilson showed me once, and it's essentially what you do is you go heart to heart, but you have both the guy on the bottom has his hands to his side, the guy on top has his hands
His
behind his
hands
back,
behind his
like
back.
yeah.
Yep.
And I tapped a guy in that drill. And I remember just being like, I was there, putting my head down and sort of trying not to lose the position. He was moving around, and all of a sudden I just feel his tap, and I was like, "You're right." He's like, "Oh, I just couldn't take it anymore." And I was like, "Well, I went through a big phase where I was watching some Henry Aiken's videos, because I really really like his approach to pressure, and so I went through about 2 months of trying to tap everybody at the gym with his scarf hold pressure,
Mm,
and I think I got about 5 or 6 people, and I
nice.
felt really mean, so then I stopped doing it.
Yeah, that's the fun of jujitsu, man. The
Well,
experimental
exactly.
phase.
Exactly. You just got to mess around a little bit, have fun. And I think that that's the beauty of jiu-jitsu is, you can mess around. I mean, often I'll roll with my eyes closed,
Mm-hmm.
and because and it's not, the guys are like, "Oh, you're rolling with your eyes again." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, but it's not nothing against you. It's just I'm trying to feel something that's happening." So it's one of those nice things, and to be honest, like, when I'm messing around and I'm at the gym with the boys, and they're sort of, I'm teaching a class, and I'm like, okay, well, we've done this. Okay, what am I going to do today? Well, I feel like being defensive. So I've actually like pulled side control, like where I've literally started a sparring session and literally like went down pulling guard, but I actually just moved my leg out of the way so the guy can have side control top, and
Wow.
just so that I can then defend his whatever he's deciding to do from underneath.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You
because
pulled you pulled side control.
you know it, it's one of those things that sometimes it's nice to be defensive because you feel things differently. And I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
for me, I like to put myself in bad positions. I remember starting. We had a guy come in for an open mat, and he was I think he was a 4 stripe white belt from another gym sort of nearby. And I was like, oh, I was showing them some bits, and he's like, oh, I'm always having a hard time doing this. I'm like, okay, tell you what, you start. He was like, he couldn't finish a rear naked choke. I don't
Mm.
know what I can't remember what he was doing wrong with it, but I said, okay, you put your hooks in, put on a full rear naked choke on me, and then we'll spar from there. And that's how we started the sparring. And I've done that a few times where I've, and I remember Hickson talking about this as well. He's like, yeah, he had a world champion. He came in, he was like, yeah, put me in a full rear naked, and that's how we're going to start the roll. But he's like, put it in fully, like, apply the pressure. And he was able to get out. So I was like, I went through a phase where I was like, I want to try and test some of this.
Mm-mm.
And, so I went through a phase of sparring where I would literally give up arm bars, triangles, just to be able to see how effectively I can get out. And yeah, don't get me wrong, I got caught a lot of times. But what it meant was that I was able to then, say, oh yeah, okay, this is what he did. Okay, so next time I was rolling with that same person, you know, I'd give them an arm, and all of a sudden they throw up the arm bar, and I'm like, all right, pressure defense, or
Mm-hmm.
knee on belly, or scoot down your hips so that their collar choke back isn't working as well. So the one thing that we do at our school, and is what Roger does at his school in London as well, is that there's a lot of positional sparring, and I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Um, being in bad positions, being comfortable in bad positions, and being comfortable under pressure. I think people forget that when you're in jiu-jitsu, it's oh yeah, I'm in the guard, I've got mount or a bit of side control, but if it's done correctly, it's horrendous. Even when someone's in my guard,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not relaxed. I'm
No.
pulling in, pulling on their hips. I'm sucking my heels into my butt. I'm constantly pulling at lapels to make them uncomfortable. And something that Silvio Bering and Scott Schilling told me probably at the very start of my jiu-jitsu journey was, it's all good and fun and games to play around, but be first. If you want to dictate the way you're rolling, you have to be first.
Gotta
Because
be.
then they're playing the defensive game. Even if it's be first to pull guard, whatever your game is, as long as you initiate, I think that's the big thing, and that's something when we train the guys for comps, um, I'm always saying be first, because then that way they're on the back heel. Um, but it's one of those things that everybody has a different approach to jiu-jitsu, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Um, I definitely attest to the fact that the way I teach is top pressure, top game. Don't get me wrong, I still teach guard because I think it's important. I think you should be able to sweep from guard, submit from guard, frustrate people from guard. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because if you can't do those things, you're not going to then see those openings. And I think that's the big. I think when people talk about the differences between belts, um, when
Oh,
you're
I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second before. Yeah.
all
All right,
right.
you
So
continue.
anyway, I think the big thing that when I'm teaching, people always ask me like, oh, what's the difference between a white belt, a blue belt, purple belt, brown belt? In terms of like, on a black belt, like what's the knowledge base? And like, to be very fair with you, I think a white belt knows, I would say, say a four stripe white belt, he will know exactly probably all the moves that I know.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is, the application, the timing, the sensitivity. As you grow in jiu-jitsu, the thing is, you're a white belt. So think of it like, I always like to talk to people and students specifically about jiu-jitsu in the form of a chess match. As a
Mm-hmm.
white belt, you're thinking 1 to 2 moves ahead. As a blue belt, maybe you're thinking 4 to 5 moves ahead, maybe three, depends on the level of your blue belt. As a
Mm-hmm.
purple belt, you might be 5, 6, 7, 8 moves ahead. As a brown belt, you might be 10, 15 moves ahead. As a black belt, it's not really about how many moves ahead I am. It's about the moves I'm doing are making you do certain things that I want you to do that then
Mm-hmm.
will allow me to do something else. I think
Exactly.
that's the big difference. Is like, you know, in a sense, like, brown belts will start to set traps for people to fall into, and then they're in the trap. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
as a black belt, almost, you're going, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm going to set this trap, but I need this to happen first, so I need to do this first, and they're going to react this way, then I'm going to do that, they're going to react to this, and then that's when the trap comes. And it's
Right.
almost like that chaining of things, um, that really is the big separation between sort of higher level jiu-jitsu guys. um,
Yeah.
and when I roll with other black belts, it's like, the roles can be like, I could be stuck in a half guard for a minute because I know that if I move, I'm going to get swept.
Oh
But if
yeah.
I very slowly inch and sort of add pressure, and all of a sudden they don't like that pressure, then they move, I move, and then I'm out. So such a different, rolling. Like, I'm lucky enough that I get to roll with, white belts to black belts pretty much weekly. We've got a couple brown belts at the gym. We've got purple belts. We've got blue belts, white belts. We've got a couple of visiting black belts as well that come around. So it's really just lovely. And when I go down to Rogers in London, I get smashed by all his black belts, and it's fun.
Then all
But then
right.
when I pass their guard, it's also fun for me. I remember rolling with this one guy who was really, really tough. And it took me, I would say, a better part of a 5-minute roll just to pass his guard. But it was such a victory after doing it. Because I'm like, I knew that if I messed up even one little detail, I'd be either on my back or on a submission. Um, so, but yeah, I feel that jujitsu is one of those things that, I think everybody should try and get into it. Um, it's really good for your well-being, really good for, mental health, um, great exercise, builds your stamina really well, and quite frankly, you build friendships for life.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'll tell you a really story about my one of my good friends. He's a black belt in Canada, um, and I've known Dave for better part of almost 19 years. He was at the gym. He was a blue belt when I started at my second gym, and he was always Dave from jiu-jitsu. I was always Raf from jiu-jitsu. And it was one of those things we just kept in touch. When I moved to England, he was in touch. When I'd go back over to Canada, I'd go to his gym. Then he got his black belt. Then I got and then so he was like, "Oh, dude, I'm traveling across. I'm doing some seminars, and I'm doing the Globetrotters seminar in, I think it was in Holland or somewhere like that. I can't remember exactly where it was."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I'm going to be, in Europe, so I'll fly to London and meet up with you, and we can, go do an open mat." And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." So he's like, "I'll be there on Saturday at 3 p.m." And I was like, "All right." So I'm sort of watching the clock, going, "Okay, it's 2:50. Where is he?" And about 3 hours go by, nothing. So I start texting him. Like, I Facebook message him. I texted him. I was like, where are you?" And I remember when I gave him my number originally over Facebook, when I typed it in through the iPhone, I hit the wrong button, so the last digit was wrong. Uh,
Oh.
yeah, but the thing was though, like, he had my address, he had everything, he had my email, like the works.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but then, so finally, about 10 o'clock, I get a phone call from customs at the airport saying, "Yes, we're calling from immigration. There's a guy called Dave that's here to visit you." I was like, "Yeah, Dave from Jiu Jitsu." They're like, what's his surname? I was like, I don't know. And she's like, how long have you known Dave? I'm like, since 2006. And she's like, and you don't know his name? No. He's Dave from Jits.
He says from Jiu-Jitsu. I told you.
And I was like, she's like, you know that Dave doesn't know your name either. I'm like, no, because I'm Raf from Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, yeah, he's coming to stay with me for like a weekend, and then he's going back to Canada. And she was like, how come you guys don't know your surnames? I'm like, well, it never came up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I've rolled with him numerous times. I've been to his house. He's been to my house in Canada. And then he came to visit me in London, and it was like such a palaver because it was like he got stopped at customs because I think he answered something wrong on his declaration form or something. And then they're like, who are you going to see? Blah, blah, blah. And they were like, he's like, yeah, I'm going to see Raf from Jiu-Jitsu. And then, of course, because my number was wrong in his Facebook feed, they couldn't get a hold of me. So they were like questioning him and grilling him.
Oh, no.
And he's like, man, all I want to do is like go see my friend and do some rolls.
Oh, no.
But yeah, that was hilarious. But yeah, we finally ended up getting cleared up, and now we actually know each other's surname, which is quite funny. But yeah, just in almost, this was about 6 or 7 years ago. So yeah, we until that point we just it never came up. It's one of those things. But we're still good friends. We have a good laugh about this every time. And every time I go over to his gym in Canada, all the boys are like, hey, did you fill out your customs declaration form correctly? So it's it's good laughs, and like I said, jiu-jitsu builds some really, really good friendships. But
some of the best. Some of the best friendships you will build is in jiu-jitsu.
Definitely. But anyway, dude, I think I need to probably head up and make sure that all the kids are in bed and all my wife's okay.
Yeah. We got one more thing before we wrap it up.
Go ahead.
So yeah, because you pretty much explained your story very, very well, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, but we asked everybody to come on the show. This question, past or present. You've mentioned some names before, but anybody you would love to get a chance to roll with? Top 3 people.
Top 3 people. Well,
yeah,
I'm gonna say top 3 people I'd like to roll with at the moment. People I haven't rolled with because there's been some pretty interesting people I have rolled with. But I would say Renzo Gracie. Definitely. I'd say Gordon Ryan just to see what happens. And number 3 would probably be it's tough picking 3, I would say. Renzo Gordon definitely. And I'd say, you know what? Probably what's his name? The guy from Atos. His name escapes me now. Andre Galvao.
Yeah.
Galvao. I mean, I could go on. I mean, Shanji Hibero, but yeah, Andre Galvao, Gordon Ryan, and Renzo. Renzo, I think, would be interesting because Renzo's old school pressure.
Old school pressure. I was just going to say old school pressure. Old school pressure.
Well, thank you very much for having me on because it's really nice to just chat jiu-jitsu and say my side of things, and just spread the love of it all because I think it's it's very important.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, man. I love to get a chance to sit down and talk to a lot of, anybody and everybody that does jiu-jitsu to get their, to get their view on it, man. It's been fun so far, man. I greatly appreciate you for coming on and doing the episode today.
No worries, man. Thank you for having me, and we'll be in touch, and when you post it, I'll definitely share it out to everybody here I know, and let me know when that goes up so that I can share it, and and just spread the love of jiu-jitsu, man. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, man. That's it. That's it.
All
Well,
right.
man, that's the end of today's episode. I would like to thank Ralph one more time for coming on the show and sharing his jiu-jitsu knowledge with us. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please go and follow our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube page to stay updated on all future episodes. This has been Talk Your Jits podcast. Keep rolling, keep grinding, and remember, long live jiu-jitsu. Have a great day.